Our 3-hour discussion will be kicking off with the incredible author and broadcaster Emma Dabiri, whose debut book, Don't Touch My Hair, takes us from pre-colonial Africa through the Harlem Renaissance, Black Power, and onto today's natural hair movement, the cultural appropriation wars and beyond. She'll be in conversation with Galdem's head of editorial and massive Emma Dabiri superfan, Charlie-Brinkhurst Cuff, who recently published her first book, Mother Country, the story of the Windrush generation, for what promises to be a stimulating conversation, uncovering the mathematical systems in Black hairstyles and more. Let's welcome them both to the stage.
Hello, thank you for being here. This is the highest stage I think I've ever been on in my life.
You wouldn't want to have vertigo, would you? It's
No,
like, higher than I anticipated.
So yeah, we're here today to talk about Emma's amazing book, Don't Touch My Hair. Don't Touch My Hair was a book I was waiting for like 2 years because Emma and I share a literary agent. And she was like, she's writing this book about black hair. And I was like, oh my God. I think I was probably the first person to contact you about it.
Yeah, definitely, yeah.
I'll take that. Yeah, and it just, reading it was an absolute revelation. It was better than I could have ever imagined. It touches on so many things I didn't expect it to go into. And it was just like really refreshing. And so when the sort of topic for this particular conversation that Galdem is curating around stories and how we're going to change the way that we tell our stories in the future came up, I was like, Don't Touch My Hair will be perfect for that, because even though a lot of the book is about history and our history is of black people and retelling that history, I think importantly it kind of sets a precedent, or at least I like to think it does, I don't know if you do, for what the future of the discourse around black hair might be. So we've got a short video just now of when I originally interviewed Emma about Don't Touch My Hair, and we got our hair braided together. I'm not sure where it'll be showing, maybe on these screens here. For the benefit of those who don't know how this book came about.
Growing up, I desperately wanted it to just look anything other than the way it did. And so I did anything within my power to kind of to achieve that. And I just really basically wanted to have straight European hair. So I thought about hair a lot. I did a lot of stuff with my hair from a young age. I don't even know what my natural texture is. I need to stop doing this. I need to stop relaxing my hair. When I got pregnant with my son, did it, and I chopped it all off. But it was just through the process of, cutting it off, seeing its texture, learning to understand its texture, all of the things I could do with it, experimenting with different natural styles, that I came to kind of recreate my relationship with it.
Yeah, that's a pretty good introduction, I'd say. Since that day where I interviewed you, and I think the first copies of the book arrived as well, didn't they?
Yeah, that's where I saw the first final copies of the book. So if you remember, I wasn't even able to look at them until about an hour into our conversation, because I just felt like this moment has finally come. I felt so nervous, but after about an hour of them sitting there, I was like, okay, I can look. I was really scared I was going to find a mistake. So yeah, that was very early days.
I can imagine. But since then, it's been quite a few months now since the book came out. The reaction I've seen online has been amazing. So many women, especially black women, have been reading the book, consuming it. Do you feel more confident in your sort of abilities as a storyteller? How has the process been?
Yeah, it was very difficult. In those early interviews, it was very difficult to kind of answer those type of questions, because I hadn't gotten much response or feedback to the book. And I was like, well, I don't know, maybe everyone's going to hate it. But the feedback, the response has been really well received. So yeah, that's been really encouraging. Just on my way here, I got a message from a mixed race Irish girl, Irish and African. I'm not sure what African country, but Irish and African. And she was just saying to me that
in the book, I talk about moving to the UK and doing my degree in African Studies and being introduced to the writing of Frantz Fanon, the famed kind of post-colonial theorist, and specifically his book, Black Skins, White Masks, and a passage in that where he talks about the psychological impact of just being like an isolated black person who is subjected to the white gaze. What that does to you, just being looked at in that way, what that does to you. And I had such a moment of recognition and validation when he wrote about the psychological cost of that experience. And I felt, all of those times that there was gaslighting, and I was told that I just had a chip on my shoulder, or I was imagining these things, to see those experiences written about by Fanon, this really reputed writer, was just like so important to me. And the girl who messaged me today was saying, the way that you mentioned Fanon in your book, that's kind of what your book is doing for me. And she was just like, yeah, it's actually quite a healing and therapeutic process to see my experiences being discussed, assessed, and validated in this way. So I've had quite a lot of feedback like that, and that is more than I could ask for, so that makes me really happy.
Yeah, no, I'm really glad to hear that, because obviously that is exactly the same way I felt as well, like growing up in a very sort of isolating environment, and then slowly sort of coming into my own like black consciousness as I got older, and like reading books like yours and Afro Hirsch's as well in particular. I think those two texts really spoke to me and really sort of validated what I went through when I was younger, which was not like quite as bad as some of the experiences that you've described, but still painful, as it is for most black people who are subjected to racism, microaggressions, whatever else in these sorts of environments. But yeah, the next question I wanted to ask you was about our histories, I suppose, and how, or if you felt a responsibility through Don't Touch My Hair to kind of retell some of our histories.
Yeah, so the book took me longer to write than the time I was initially allocated to write it. And part of that was I really wanted to do justice to some of the vast material that I've come across through teaching. I teach African Studies in SOAS. So as a result of that, there's like really exciting scholarship done in African Studies, in kind of unearthing lots of subjugated like African pasts and histories, but it often doesn't, a lot of that research often doesn't travel beyond quite small numbers of academics and scholars. It isn't really disseminated into the wider world. So I knew that with this book I had an opportunity to introduce some ideas, and it's not just history, it's not just facts, but actually very different ways of perceiving reality. So a lot of African philosophy, a lot of African metaphysics. I knew that through this book I had an opportunity to present some of those more complicated or esoteric ideas to a broader and more mainstream audience, but it was kind of striking the balance of like making that accessible and also always having to make it relate back to hair, because essentially the book is about hair, that ended up being quite a long and involved process. And yeah, it took me longer than I had first anticipated, but I definitely felt under pressure to do those ideas justice, because I think a lot of those ideas are very radical and progressive and very valuable, but are just so little known. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would be sort of one of them that you particularly sort of felt connected to?
So, excuse me. Just off the top of my head, I had there's a section where I talk about the invention of women and how I talk about gender not being an organizing principle in a lot of pre-colonial African societies in the way that it is today. And that really puts paid to the narrative that we are kind of always sold, that's always reinforced, that African women are just inherently subjugated by African men and have been oppressed by patriarchy for millennia. That's actually often not the case. And one of the things that I found really interesting was, thank you. One of the things that I found really interesting was the absence of gender distinctions in Yoruba language, excuse me. And that's something that I did further research and realized it's not just in Yoruba, it's actually like in a lot of sub-Saharan African languages that they don't use, at the moment there are all of these kind of contestations and all of this discourse around using neutral pronouns. And there's a lot of people pushing for that, and then there's a lot of resistance to it in English, and there's a lot of kickback against it as well. This is something that just exists in Yoruba anyway, and just exists in lots of African languages. Equally, lots of Yoruba names are gender non-specific. So the point is that linguistically, gender isn't emphasized in Yoruba in the way it is in English. So the argument is supported linguistically that gender actually wasn't as much of a defining principle of how people were viewed and valued and judged as we are told that it is, and as it is in European languages and in English. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I thought that was so interesting. And then also you already know this, but just all the concepts around time and the treatment of time I found so fascinating.
Yeah. I'm happy to talk about them if you want me to.
What I wanted to bring it back to was hairstyles, because obviously one of the most fascinating things for me was finding out that cane rowing cornrowing has been around since the ancient times. It was on Stone Age cave walls.
Yeah, so there's a cave, I can't remember, forgive me, there's a cave in the Sahara Desert somewhere where cave paintings have been discovered that are incredibly ancient. I mean, they're cave paintings. And they have images of people, both men and women, whose hair is cornrowed in exactly the same way that we would see cornrows today. So this is going back millennia. Then you also have ancient civilizations like the Nok civilization, which is around the 11th century in Nigeria. And they have carvings which also have cornrows. So again, you see that historical consistency. It's very far from it's very far from now into the past, but it's also very far into the future from those cave paintings. So there's this historical continuum. Then you go into Benin, and you see this is a kingdom that flourished from the 1400s to the 1800s. Actually, when the British raided Benin, and that kind of precipitated the eventual collapse of it. But again, on the Benin bronzes, which are this really on the Benin bronzes, again, you see cornrows. So you see them with historical continuity throughout African history. But it's interesting in the way that they're perceived now. I write about a court case that happened a few years ago, where a school eventually went to court to defend, a school in London went to court to defend their right to exclude a black student from his school for wearing cornrows. And the argument was, we can't have these non-traditional hairstyles. They're also gang affiliated, and it just doesn't kind of correspond. If we let these gang influences into the school, all hell will break loose. But this argument that they were non-traditional, I was like, how can it get more traditional than something that is millennia old?
Actually.
So
yeah, and I think you must have heard a lot of stories from people about discrimination they faced in their lifetimes with their hair since the books come out, I would presume.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, even before writing the book, it's not 1 month goes by where I don't hear a case of a child being excluded or having some sort of issue in school because of the hairstyle that they're wearing. And that's in this country today.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal.
Yeah, it's a massive shame. The other thing I wanted to sort of probe you on was Afrofuturism and how that sort of links in to some of the themes in your book. I know it's like a topic of interest for you. You've done a Radio 4 documentary on
Yeah,
Afrofuturism?
Journeys into Afrofuturism.
Yeah. You said it was going to be a complex answer, this one, so.
Oh, yeah. let me try and keep it relatively straightforward. So Afrofuturism, I think obviously the word itself, one's mind immediately goes to the future, thinks about futurism, but I'm really interested in, I think Afrofuturism also a major, an important component of it is history, and is the histories of Africa and histories of Black people. One of the themes that I talk about in the book is time, as you mentioned. I introduce time through the idea that to do black hair, to have natural hair, and to maintain and groom black hair is considered very time-consuming, and that it's really too time-consuming to be practical. So in order to kind of debunk that theory, I look at different ways that time was organized in African cultures. And one of the things that was really fascinating, I found, was, so within Eurocentric understandings of time, is the idea that time progresses in a linear fashion and things happen in chronological order, one after the other, and they end. Whereas in a lot of African concepts of time, time is seen, rather than being linear, as being chronological. So things happen, but rather than ending, they repeat. And one of the central ways we see this manifested is in African spiritual belief systems, where, unlike with Christianity, say, where one lives their life and dies, that it ends, they go to heaven if they've behaved themselves. African cosmologies believe that we are reborn, our ancestors are reborn, we become ancestors, we are reborn. So time is constantly repeating and operating in this secular fashion. A society that believes in that and organizes time according to that operates in kind of different ways. And I think with Afrofuturism, what you see is this idea of the past inherent in the future kind of existing in the past, and there not being these clear distinctions between past, present, and future, but them all often feeding into each other in this kind of feedback loop. Yeah.
So
does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
And you also point out that in the book that black hairstyles are often seen as being futuristic. I mean, is that just ignorance on the part of white people, or is that because they are so incredible that
Yeah, no, I don't think it's ignorance. I think it's testimony to how innovative they are. That something that is literally as old as the dawn of humanity looks to many of our eyes as being very cutting edge, that still looks futuristic. And I compare that to, say, European hairstyles, where you look at a hairstyle from the 1960s and it looks like a period hairstyle. I love lots of 1960s hairstyles, I love lots of 1940s and 50s hairstyles, but they look dated, they look old-fashioned. If you look at a hairstyle from 100 years ago, a European hairstyle, it's old-fashioned, it's a period hairstyle. Whereas we have these incredibly ancient African hairstyles, and they still look, or they are still imagined as though they've just been invented and are described as non-traditional, when you can't get any more traditional, really.
Than that, yeah.
And also, I would wear some of the same hairstyles that my Nigerian grandmother would wear, and people would be thinking that's some edgy style.
Yeah.
Whereas if I was to try and replicate the hairstyles of my white grandmother when she was young, well, I'd just look like I was trying to do a 1950s kind of throwback thing. So there's just a different,
They're just better, aren't they?
I'm honestly not saying they're better, but I just think there's an innovation and there's a dynamism that is very particular to them.
Mm-hmm. That's a very nuanced Emma response. So we just have time for one more question. And I was just wondering about how you hope that your book will affect the discourse around black hair moving into the future, or as we move forward in this loop. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we have a tendency to think that because more people have natural hair now, that the battle is won, and that like a lot of that stigma around natural hair has been overcome and has been dealt with, and we've kind of successfully decolonized. But if you look at the 1960s, there was a similar kind of moment to now through Black Power. And it started with Black Power, but then it became mainstream, and you saw people sporting afros and then sporting very traditional braided styles again. But by the 80s and 90s, straightening had become the default, so people were chemically straightening their hair again, even though there'd been all these advances 10 or 20 years earlier. So with the book, I really want to kind of get to the heart of like undoing, because that's the thing. I'm not sure like the stigma that is attached to, I think like particularly the coilier, kinkier textures of Afro hair has really been dispensed with. There's still this idealized version of natural hair that lots of people still aspire to, which is this kind of like softer, looser curl. And I think until we shift that beauty standard and really acknowledge the beauty and also like the versatility and like your hair texture, like what that hair texture, like the beauty of that kind of hair texture, I think that, and I have a similar one myself, so I'm not pointing you out so you can't see my hair because I've got these boho locks going on, which need to come out actually. My edges are a mess. But I think until we kind of shift that beauty standard, we might end up having made these advances, but things might kind of slip back to how they were a while ago. So we need to kind of, make sure we keep on top. Well, I don't know, it's not anyone's personal responsibility, but yeah, I hope that the book goes some way in kind of reinforcing the beauty and versatility of particularly type 4 Afro hair. I always ride for my type 4. And I know people have an issue with those classifications. Like we were having our hair done together, and the hairdresser that was doing your hair was like, "Oh no, I don't like that type 3, type 4." And I realized so lots of you won't know what I'm talking about, and because we only have 30 minutes, I don't have time to go into it. I'm sorry, but the black people in the room will know. They don't like those classifications like 3 and 4. But in terms of just being able to explain what you're talking about, I recognize how they're problematic, but I also find the system quite useful. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Hello. Oh, no, the mic's not on. Oh, it is on. Thank you so much to Emma and Charlie for that exhilarating conversation. We've got the opportunity for people to ask a couple of questions to Emma and Charlie, should you desire. They're going to come back up on the stage. Has anyone got a question in the audience? Yep, we've got questions. There's a question there at the front. Is there any mics or? Yeah, you've got mics.
Hi, thank you very much for, down here. Hello. I was intrigued. I didn't realize people don't like the 4, 3, 2, 1 classifications, because my understanding of it is that once you're able to name something, you're able to then know how to navigate. Can you explain what their reasoning was?
I don't know if this is necessarily what the hairdresser was referring to, but one of the issues that I find with it is I find the classification of racialized features like doesn't sit with me very well, because it harks back to scientific slavery, when you have kind of like different races ranked hierarchically, and different types of Africans ranked hierarchically. And the hair ranking system, to me, has quite strong echoes of that. That history is kind of too recent for that hair ranking to sit comfortably with me. And there is a hierarchy in the hair ranking, even though it's not supposed to be there. Yeah. We know it's there. So that would be why I feel uncomfortable with it. I don't want to speak for the hairdresser, but
I think Ebony, the hairdresser, doesn't like it from like a purely like aesthetic point of view, because she says that most sort of people have different textures on their head anyway. So like to be like, oh, you're just type 4, when actually, you know, you got some 3C curls at the back is like wrong. But
yeah. So I think there's that kind of more practical reason as well. I'm not a very practical person, so I don't really consider stuff like that. But I find it useful for just distinguishing. So even though as I said, I feel sometimes uncomfortable with it, I also find it useful for distinguishing what I'm talking about. Because if you just say black hair or afro hair, that is actually quite vast, yeah. And there's a lot of people who sit within that description, but they still have quote unquote good hair. So the conversation is quite different. So I like to be like very specific in what it is that I'm talking about.
yeah.
It's one of those things where it's a tool, but it's not the be all and end all. Do you get what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah.
Any other questions? Stick your hands up. Oh, just one over there.
Hi, thank you. I remember reading an article in The Guardian some time ago, and it may be that the author is in this room and I just don't know, but it was mentioning something about this, how people get into Oxbridge, for example. And one of the reasons why people may not go to Oxford is because there's no place where they can have their hair done. And it's part of this culture that's not provided in these places. How do you think your book may open up that conversation, and if there is a room for this conversation?
Thank you. So I didn't read that article, but I'm familiar with the article that you're talking about. I didn't read it because it was widely kind of debunked as ridiculous, and the argument against it was, okay, so to say that black students don't go to Oxbridge because they're kind of these snowflake millennials who can't get their hair done obscures the real systemic and structural reasons why black students can't get into Oxbridge. So it was kind of quite a dog whistle, I feel, a deeply problematic article. Yeah, I've never, yeah, so I kind of would want to I would want to, what's the word? I would want to challenge the article to begin with. But to answer the broader question of what you do when you are a black person with afro hair and you're in a very white environment, what do you do with your hair? Yeah, that's something that I do talk about a lot in the book, because that was very much my experience growing up in Ireland, and it had a huge impact on me, because my hair was very much outside the beauty standards of the world that I lived in, but on top of that, by black standards, it just wasn't done. Like, my hair just wasn't done, so it was I would say objectively a mess. I think I do get, I have quite a lot of, particularly like white mothers of mixed, I don't like the term mixed race, but again, like the hair classification system, I'm just going to use it so you know what I'm talking about. The white mothers of mixed race children kind of asking me for tips about doing their children's hair. And I think it's still challenging because there is so much kind of knowledge and expertise required to look after and do black hair well, and it's not something you just are born knowing. You have to learn how to do it. And also there's lots of products that you need. But I think it is easier now than it was like in the 1980s in Ireland, in that there's the internet, so that's like a great resource tool, and you can also buy stuff online. So even if you live somewhere where these products aren't easily available, you can have them sent to you, and that's not something. If that had existed when I was a child, that would have been a game changer. So yeah, I see like a lot of kind of black and mixed race girls in Ireland now, and they're just able to do their hair because even if they've grown up with parents that don't know how to do it, they can just teach themselves from online resources, and they can just buy products. So for me, I just didn't have a clue. I had to actually leave Ireland and physically like go to a black environment to like learn how to do my hair and to buy the products and to get people to do my hair. So I do think it's become slightly easier. But as far as I'm aware, that article was one that we should take with a huge pinch of salt. Yeah.
Thank you. Oh, question over there. This is the last one, just FYI.
Hi, ladies. Funny enough, I lived in Ireland for 18 months playing professional football in a town called Mullingar, which you're probably...
Yep. Mullingar.
So, and when I went to Ireland, I actually had cane rows. So when I went, after the first 6 weeks, I gave up and cut off my hair because wearing my hair in an afro, because I couldn't get my hair done, I just felt under extreme pressure from the people in the town. Obviously, Mullingar is a very small town. And I just want to know how you overcame that kind of daily kind of stereotyping and oppression, and how you kind of overcame that, and how you challenge stereotypes around you in Ireland.
Thank you. When were you there? How long ago was that?
Oh, gosh, 2002 to 2003, so yeah.
Yeah. So even Ireland has actually, I notice now there's a much more visible black presence, a visible non-white presence, and particularly black than there even was then. And as a result of that, it has gotten slightly less, you walk into a room and silence just descends kind of thing. So things have changed there a little bit, but certainly when I was living there, it would be more like the kind of time that you were describing. And I mean, eventually I overcame it by just leaving. Like as soon as I finished school, like I left. And I had just spent, and I've really rehabilitated my relationship with Ireland, but I did feel like very resentful to it for a long time after I'd left. I felt like I was always like very outspoken, and I was always, when I would have those kind of incidents, like that you were describing, I was usually very like vocal in challenging them, but it just meant that my life was like very combative, and I very much had that stigma of being like the angry black girl with a big chip on her shoulder type of thing. And it was only really when, it was, for me, I had to leave. I just found the weight of that and the isolation as well, because I didn't have any peers. I didn't have like I just didn't really know any other black people. And even as I didn't really have black friends, my mom's white, my dad had moved back to Nigeria. So there was nobody that really could understand from a personal perspective what it was that I was experiencing. So I just found it like extremely isolating. But for me, I guess eventually writing about it and being able to speak about these things publicly has gone a long way in, I think, shifting attitudes. And some of the conversations, I'm in Ireland all the time now talking about these things. And in the past, when there was a lot of kind of hostility when I raised these issues, there's now, I'm not saying it's like some post-racial like utopia or anything, or that anywhere is. But there is now definitely like a willingness and an openness to have these discussions and to kind of like try and do better in a way that was like very absent when I was younger. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Can we give a massive round of applause to Emma Dabiri?